Players are asking a plethora of changes to the game of Yu-Gi-Oh! Price support, game mechanics, and collectability are all factors that are being enhanced by new TCGs and makes players switch sides. Honestly, I wish Konami would harvest these low-hanging fruits themselves, but more often than not, they don't.
For most people, the value's not there to be a pro Yu-Gi-Oh player. I have friends who play One Piece and they made 80K last year from One Piece tournaments, and I'm like, that's absurd.
That's a big problem also in the collecting aspect compared to Pokemon, where still I hear all of my younger cousins talking about Pokemon. They know about it. They don't know shit about Yu-Gi-Oh!
Yep.
They don't even know what Yu-Gi-Oh! Is. And Disney Lorcana specifically, I think, has a really big point here because they are targeting like families.
I think it's a major issue, especially with how complex Yu-Gi-Oh! As a card game's become. Do you mind me asking, what is the frequency in which that Flesh and Blood releases new sets?
So you have the regular version on the one side and then a full art side on this. Just imagine a Blue Eyes White Dragon in this style.
Yeah,
like,
that'd be sick.
We would go crazy.
It's something that like they could easily do, and it looks like maybe they're starting to with that whole Effect Veiler thing.
Hey Academy, my name is Alex and this is the Fabled Academy podcast, where I talk to the best players and competitive personalities in the realm of TCGs. You are listening to the 19th episode, where my guest is YCS champion and YouTuber Marcus Hayden. In our last episode, Marcus and I talked about if it was worth it quitting Yu-Gi-Oh! And this time, we talk about the low-hanging fruits of Yu-Gi-Oh! That are being picked up by other games. I want to talk with you about how Yu-Gi-Oh! Will survive these days with all of these new TCGs and all of this competition. I don't think that Yu-Gi-Oh! Will die out, don't get me wrong, but I think definitely that Yu-Gi-Oh! Can't stand the point that it has forever if they don't change and adapt to the playing field.
I actually fear that Yu-Gi-Oh! Will die out at some point, because once they stopped the anime a while back, as well as just like, you can see it when you go to the events, like the average age of Yu-Gi-Oh! Players is so much higher. I remember it was like flooded with teenagers when I was younger, and it's like all the people I played with are either still playing or they got friends that are playing. But their like Dragon Duels is like substantially smaller than it used to be. And I think that's a big issue for the longevity of the game. I don't think it's dying anytime soon. But yeah, and I do think they made some good movement by adding the Ultimate Time Wizards into Yu-Gi-Oh! Because Magic has, modern or legacy formats, or Pokemon does the older formats as well. And I think that's really good because it'll keep your older fan base. But I think adding younger people to the current game is going to be a big problem for them in the future. As for pricing, I think one of the big issues that they have is it's just like substantially compared to all the other big card games, it is like by far some of the worst value, I guess. Most of the people I talk to, including myself, they still play Yu-Gi-Oh! Because they want to be a Yu-Gi-Oh! Pro and try to make 40K a year or something playing Yu-Gi-Oh! Because that's just not realistic. I guess the only person who might have a claim to that's like a Jesse Cotton or something. Mm-hmm. But yeah, for most people, it's just the value's not there to be a pro Yu-Gi-Oh! Player. Whereas like I have friends who play One Piece and tell me that they made 80K last year from doing well in One Piece tournaments. And I'm like, that's absurd. So yeah, I guess that in terms of pricing, Yu-Gi-Oh's definitely got to make changes. I do think they've been taking steps in the right direction, doing the giant cards the way they've been doing them for Ultimate Time Wizard, or now doing the stamped prize cards. They've had stamped prize cards, but it would still be the same one. So they kept doing like the Another Verse Dragon or whatever the one that was after it. The issue with those is, like I said before, is you're giving out vanilla prize cards that aren't like childhood memory cards. It's not like a Dark Magician, right? It's not a Blue Eyes. It's some random dragon no one knows about, and it's a vanilla, and you've printed 30 of them. So just because you're stamping them for the event that they're at, they're not special to anyone. But if you take cards that people want, that are sought after, and you're stamping them, and you're giving it past just the top 3 duelists, I think that's a huge step. So hopefully they bring that over to, Europe and North America, and it's not just the OCG, but we'll see.
Yeah, I think you are making a big point here in also talking about the longevity of the game by introducing new players to it. Mm-hmm. Because in my opinion, the game can survive and also thrive with the player base that it has, and if they can retain it. But the big issue is, as you said, if no new players are joining, or if the game doesn't have a big flow of new players from the younger child age, that's a big problem. Also, not only in the player base, but also in the collecting aspect of the hobby, which in Yu-Gi-Oh is huge, right?
Yep.
And it's compared to Pokemon, where still I hear like all of my younger cousins talking about Pokemon. They know about it. They don't know shit about Yu-Gi-Oh. Yep. They don't even know what Yu-Gi-Oh is. They never heard about it. They never saw a Yu-Gi-Oh card. And that is a big problem because there's no new nostalgia coming in compared to Pokemon or Disney. And that is, I think, also why these new card games like Star Wars Unlimited, Flesh and Blood, and also Disney Lorcana, of course, have a big chance because they can get these new players. And Disney Lorcana specifically, I think, has a really big point here because they are targeting like families, and Disney is still going strong as an IP and also with the nostalgia aspect for all of the younger generations. And they can now start to play Disney Lorcana compared to what we were doing, playing Yu-Gi-Oh, going your route down of being a competitive player and trying to pursue a YCS. That will not happen as often in the future as well. And that is also a problem for the collectors, because basically when you don't have new collectors coming in, at some point you're just selling to the same people.
I think it's a major issue, especially with how complex Yu-Gi-Oh as a card game's become. Because I think like one of the benefits to Magic or Pokemon is they're just a lot simpler of games. I used to work at a card shop when I was in high school, and you would get like even high school kids to much older adults completely new to Magic the Gathering, but they have these very simple rules and very like non-competitive formats to where it's no different than getting a family to play like Monopoly, the board game, but trying to get people to play Yu-Gi-Oh's. All right, guys, let's play Gloomhaven. You know what I mean? Like a really complex, like you're not going to get people to sit down and do that. So there's a lot working against Yu-Gi-Oh that makes me worried for it. But yeah, it's like you said, not being able to bring in a new crowd, as well as its increased complexity over the years. I know so many people who told me they quit because they just didn't understand link summoning, or they didn't understand the pendulum mechanic. I completely understood, because even as a competitive player, it took me a little bit to get used to it and learn how to do it effectively and really grasp it. And there's still rulings in Yu-Gi-Oh that people can't fathom why it makes sense or why it is the way it is. And you'd have to really get down to the nitty gritty, whereas you don't have those issues with a lot of other card games, I feel like, at least in my experience.
I think the same way as yourself, thinking back to 2019, to the introduction of Link Era as well, because what brought me actually to the competitive scene, even though I was not a competitive player, I want to point this out here, but I love being around that competitive environment, getting to know all of the competitive players. That's also why I started this channel. But I feel like for me in Yu-Gi-Oh specifically, there was also another side, and that was like those childhood memories and that like stories that I read when I was younger about those players, going to like Pharaoh tours and seeing pictures of the cards that they were winning or the decks that they were playing. And in 2016, Konami did something very clever to get guys like me back into the game or to those tournaments, and they introduced the Dark Illusion, and they introduced Shining Victories, and they introduced the Dark Dimensions, the movie. And that was the time where I was like, you know what? I didn't go to tournaments when I was younger, but now I have money, I have cards lying around, I have friends that play Yu-Gi-Oh, and I will just do it now. And in 2019, with that Emperor Dragon prize card, I felt like even though that prize card is so special, the game doesn't really feel to me any more like it was. I loved also some of the decks that were played during those eras. Domain Monarch, Dinosaur specifically, I think was my favorite deck of that era. But with Spiral, with all of those Link cards, and also with the artworks getting out of hand so much, I was like, it's not really for me anymore, I think.
Yeah, no, definitely. I feel like it's a good point that you bring up artwork, because older artwork was always like, it was themed. And so if something was like supposed to be childish looking, the whole deck would be, or if something was supposed to be like this cool, dark aesthetic, the whole deck would be, or like cards would be. And now they're like leaning so much into the weird waifu stuff, and I don't know. And I also don't like the artwork in general sense now compared to back then.
I feel like in One Piece, even though I'm not a big One Piece guy, I feel like it's more inherent to the IP that they have like half-naked girls and big boobs and stuff like that compared to Yu-Gi-Oh, right? Where I always remember Yu-Gi-Oh was, there was a Pharaoh game, it was a shadow game, it was dark, it was moody, there were like horrifying creatures in there, there was magic going on. They even had, they needed to rename the magic cards, right, to spell cards, because they couldn't name the magic cards, but the flavor nowadays is like vastly different, even though I can find joy at some points in there as well.
Sure. No, definitely. I just think it's funny you say that, because I'm thinking about like how even like your cutesy deck back then would be like fairies, and it's, you know what I mean? It was just not what it is today.
Yeah. I don't think that, people that enjoy that should be attacked by this, because I think it's okay that things can change in those card games. They're changing in Magic the Gathering as well. If you look at that side, people are outrageous about some of the things that are going on. And I think Yu-Gi-Oh! In that regards is doing a better job, at least from the things that you can see online, right? I'm not involved in Magic the Gathering as big, but at least from the things I read online, Yu-Gi-Oh! Doesn't really have a big problem there, where thousands of people are complaining about that vastly. But I feel like that change that we are talking about is like one of the big challenges for Yu-Gi-Oh! More than it is for Pokemon and Magic, compared when we look at Star Wars Unlimited and Disney Lorcana, Flesh and Blood, One Piece, and so on. But I'm curious on your side if you would imagine that in the future you would try out one of these more modern games and try to pursue it like in a way that you tried to pursue Yu-Gi-Oh! Back then.
Yeah, so I definitely do think at some point it's going to happen. I'm kind of on, since they introduced Retro Yu-Gi-Oh!, I've kind of been on a high enjoying this. You know, we'll see how long that lasts first. But I will say, like, One Piece, I was really close to just, because I just love the anime so much, I was really close to just, screw it, I'm going to try that. But I've even had talks with, like, my friend group that I play with that, you know, once we're done with this, what's next? And we've talked about it. So yeah, I'm definitely open to trying some of these other card games. I've had friends try to get me into Lorcana. I've even had a friend try to get me into Flesh and Blood. I've yet to have any groups near me try the Star Wars card game, but I like Star Wars. Wouldn't it be something I'd be opposed to? I'd say the most likely one would be One Piece, though, if I were to try one outside of Yu-Gi-Oh! In the current landscape. I think another benefit currently to playing Retro Yu-Gi-Oh! Is because now that I have a wife, I work full time. It's a lot easier since I already know the game, and I already know these formats as well, right? Like I spend time throughout the week doing YouTube or trying to discover something new in a format, but I'm not constantly relearning new sets or new cards that are coming out or new combo because of new cards that come out. So it's a lot less of a time investment being able to do something I'm already familiar with. I already have a very good grounding in, like Yu-Gi-Oh! In general. I've just played it so long. So I think that's another thing that probably holds me back a little bit. But like I said, it's almost inevitable that I will end up trying some other card games, because I just always do. It's happened in the past. It'll continue to happen.
I think you're talking about a really important aspect here that players in general, like yourself, that want to try a new TCG are looking at, and that is how much of a time invest the new TCG is. And that is, I think, for a lot of the more competitive players that don't want to invest like 30 hours every week into learning all the new strategies, are pushing away from Flesh and Blood, because that game is like really skill intensive. It is even the first game in Germany that is highlighted as a skill-based game, so you can earn money from it. And that's crazy, thinking how long we have TCGs, and not a single TCG did that, but Flesh and Blood did. Also because they want to support the German community, of course. They want to support the European community and having access to local bigger tournaments here in Germany, because it's easier for everyone to travel to those compared to the farthest to the east or the farthest to the west. But when I also talk to all of those more competitive players, or even those full-time TCG players today, that is what they are telling me, that they are interested in Flesh and Blood, but also that is sometimes holding them back from getting really deep into Flesh and Blood compared to One Piece or Disney Lorcana, because One Piece and Disney Lorcana are just inevitably so much easier to learn and to keep up with as well compared to Flesh and Blood. But I feel the beauty is here that you can just choose, right? If you are a really competitive player who wants to dive into 30 hours play weeks, then you can just do that with Flesh and Blood. You can also do that with One Piece, of course, but I think One Piece is just a little bit more on the easier side compared to Fab.
Do you mind me asking, what is the frequency in which that Flesh and Blood releases new sets? Because I think that's like the biggest thing for me. Because if I'm playing the game, it's more enjoyable. I can spend like 15, 20 hours, doing that. I think my biggest issue is like how frequently sets come out. Because when something has something new coming out every month, I can't keep relearning, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I get what you mean, because that is something that I thought is so crazy about Disney Lorcana. Even though I think Disney Lorcana as a concept is really great, I also love the tournaments that they are doing, Disney World, and I feel like Flesh and Blood at the moment hit a nail for me at the time invest that I also want to spend in the game, because I love to play it as well on the casual side here in the local tournament scene, because they have a system called Draft and Limited that we don't have in Yu-Gi-Oh! And I can tell you, man, it's crazy. I love it as well. But coming back to your question, it's for the main set. So Flesh and Blood in the beginning had, just like Yu-Gi-Oh!, they had like main sets and then they had supplemental sets with the reprints. But they changed that and they only have like main sets at the moment. So they are bringing out 3 in every year at the moment. So there are 3 draft sets. I think that's a little bit better compared to Disney Lorcana, where they are bringing out, I think, 4 sets every year. I'm not sure about One Piece. But for Flesh and Blood, there's something new coming in this year. And that's where they are bringing out class-specific packs. So there's a class called Guardian in Flesh and Blood, and there is a set coming out in this year, additional to the 3 draft sets. If you are a Guardian player, that's the set for you, because we don't get Guardian support in a longer time, and they basically want to support the deck, so Guardian players can also stay a little bit more active in the meta.
Oh, I kind of like that, actually, specific to classes. That'd be sweet. It'd be kind of like if specific color in Magic wasn't getting love, that they'd make a specific side set just for that color, sort of thing, right? Is kind of what I'm getting at.
Exactly, yeah, that's right. And I also feel like if you want to try out Flesh and Blood, it's much easier nowadays than compared to 3 years ago, because they have a lot of like entry-level product that you can just buy and try out the game for 30 to 50 bucks.
Okay.
Where you basically buy a deck and you can just go and play each other on a really like level that the game is played as well, even though you don't have access to all the power tools. And that is like also differentiation, because in One Piece and Disney Lorcana, the decks are like super cheap, right? You also have some more expensive decks, and if you want to bling out the decks, they can get expensive as well. But in Flesh and Blood, the competitive decks are much more expensive on the average side. You really need some more expensive cards. Also, you have these generic staples, just we have them in Yu-Gi-Oh! With Ash Blossom, hand traps, and stuff like that. That's what makes the entry barrier, the cost to compete, more in Flesh and Blood. But on the other side too, I think what Flesh and Blood players love about that is that they don't reprint things to the ground. So you don't need to worry about all of your cards losing the value in 2 years. And that also means that certain decks could be played for the last 5 years. And you could play all of the cards that you bought 5 years ago. And of course, some cards were reprinted to meet demand, but they didn't crush the value. Even though we have some outliers here, of course, if a deck gets too powerful, they need to ban some cards as well. But I think they did a really great job on that side.
How big are Flesh and Blood majors, like major tournaments?
It's very interesting, because I think it depends on the region where you are. Europe, of course, is a lot smaller than North America. Okay. That's why we have less players here in Europe. But I feel like comparing my local scene, the German scene, for example, or the European scene in general, we have a really well-built community here, even though we don't have big events of like YCS levels with more than like 2,000 players. But nationals, for example, we have, I think, around 160 players here in Germany for nationals. I know that Yu-Gi-Oh! Has like crazy numbers these days on attendances on the tournament sites.
Yeah,
but I'm not too sure.
But I mean, that'll just come over time also. But
yeah,
I was just curious, because like for me right now, like my majors are Ultimate Time Wizard events, right? And RBETs for Retro Yu-Gi-Oh! And those are like pretty consistently like 200 to 350 range, and then our nationals might be like 500. So I was just curious like how much different from that it would be. I know Flesh and Blood, I was watching the Old Card Guys YouTube channel, which used to be a Yu-Gi-Oh! Channel. They had a Flesh and Blood. I don't know if they still cover a lot of Flesh and Blood or not.
Yes, they do.
Okay, yeah. But I remember coming across and someone on their team had won a major. This might have been a few years ago, and won like 10 grand or something. I was like, holy, that's crazy.
Yeah, that's right. I feel like a shout out here needs to be given to the card guys. They are super amazing. And I have Josh Lau, member of the card guys here on the channel sometimes.
Oh, yeah.
But
I was once a card guy for YuGiOh.
Oh, really?
Mm-hmm.
No way.
Towards the end of them being the card guys in 2016, 2017. Yep.
Okay, that's interesting to hear. Yeah, I feel there are so many connections that can pop up if you travel throughout those different TCGs, right? And it's funny that comes up now with you as well.
Yeah, no.
But coming, I want to touch on that like number attendance here for Flesh and Blood in a comparison, because we have like different tournaments in Flesh and Blood, and I think that's what all of the competitive players love about the game as well, because it's structured in a way that professional Magic is, where you have like different level of tournaments. And you also have like different qualifications that you can take to go to the World Championship or the Pro Tour. I think the Pro Tour system is like nearly identical to what Magic did.
Oh, okay.
But yeah, that's what like brought over also a lot of the Magic players that missed that specific time, even though Magic has that Pro Tour level events back nowadays. But I feel like calling levels is similar to what we have in YuGiOh called YCS. And I feel tendencies there are like through the roof in the last year. With the tendencies, all or not all, but a lot of the tournaments are sold out, and we also have a tendencies over 1,000 players on a regular basis for these kind of tournaments.
Oh wow!
Which is like pretty good, I think.
Yeah, it's really good. That's like way bigger than I anticipated it.
I feel like if you're in Europe, you don't get that much attendances, but in North America, for sure.
Yeah, but over time, so I'm guessing that Flesh and Blood started just in North America. Is that why the size here is much bigger, or?
That's actually an interesting question that you're asking, because I was getting introduced to Flesh and Blood in 2021.
Okay.
But it was coming out in 2019 and 2020. I'm not 100% sure, but I think 2020 was the first set that was released. But in 2019, you could play demo decks.
Gotcha, like structures, basically.
Yeah, I actually, let me look that up, because I don't want to misqualification on this.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's just interesting, because I always wonder, like, the fact that it's still here is already big, right? Because I feel like most new card games will have a lifespan of 3 years, and if they're not still around after that is like when you kind of know. So if it's thriving 6 years into its creation, I think that's a good thing for its longevity, at least.
Yeah, definitely. I feel like the 5-year mark is what a lot of players are looking at, right?
Mm-hmm.
But I feel like, Welcome to Rave, what was coming out in 2019.
Gotcha.
Just looking up. Yeah, October 11th of 2019 was when Welcome to Rave was released. So just on the verge of 2020. And they had the release schedule was that they had first edition and unlimited, just as we had them in YuGiOh. Okay. I'm not sure if it is today the same, actually, because I don't follow the new sets that much.
Gotcha.
But they switched. They don't have first edition anymore. And that's why also in Europe they introduced the game a little bit later compared to North America, and where the game is located in New Zealand and Australia.
Oh, okay.
But yeah, basically it's a year later, I think, around a year later.
For when you guys got all the stuff.
That's right.
Okay, makes sense. Interesting.
I feel like coming to the draft aspect here, it's interesting that you tell me that you're also interested in that kind of game style, because coming from that 2016 to 2019 YuGiOh era, I never heard of draft, actually. I think I heard it maybe once, but I wasn't getting my head around what it actually is until I discovered Flesh and Blood.
Yeah, so for YuGiOh, there was a short stint where they made draft sets. In 2012 is actually when they started, and it went all the way into early 2014 maybe. And they even had some YCSs where once you got to top cut or top 16, you would draft packs instead of play your actual decks, and you have to play with that. And I think that was really cool. The issue is YuGiOh being such an archetype specific game makes it really hard in today's game to have draft sets, if that makes sense. Whereas like older YuGiOh, when it was just a hodgepodge, if you look at GOAT format, like all the cards you're playing in your deck don't really have anything to do with each other, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like even if you're playing like a archetype specific card like Gravekeeper Spy, like you're not playing it because it's a Gravekeeper, if that makes sense. So yeah, there was a period of time where YuGiOh did it and it was fun, and I wish they like leaned into it more and like even just basically created a whole separate subset of game of YuGiOh just for drafting, because drafting, it's so cool because today's Yu-Gi-Oh is a lot more focused on like just coming in with this pre-made best deck and being like a good pilot. Whereas with drafting, it's like you have to be a good deck builder on the fly. You have to be good at knowing what exists in the set so that you can like preemptively, look for certain cards and whatnot. And you also have to still be a good player and still be a good deck builder even after all. I think it's a whole separate subset of skills. And that was one of my favorite things about playing deck building games in general is you kind of get some of that. Or like that was when I did play Magic, that was my jam, was literally just drafting. Yeah. So,
hey Academy, want even more content or a way to support the channel? Check out the YouTube memberships and Patreon. Links in the description. There are 3 different levels to choose from with different benefits. And even a special offer for the team level on Patreon. Thank you so much for your support, and now back to the podcast. I also feel like you can view the game then from a different perspective, because there are some players who are focused on a period of time that they really like and then they vanish out, and you couldn't do that with draft as well in Flesh and Blood, because I enjoyed all of the last draft formats, but if there is a draft format in the future that I don't enjoy in Flesh and Blood, I can just skip the set, and also don't have that much of a cost because I go to the local tournament, I pay the fee, and then I'm gone. I don't need to bring like an expensive $1,000 deck or something to the tournament to play on my locals. And I also feel, as you said, it's a lot more like you can view the set and you don't need to know anything else elsewhere, right? You don't need to know all of the card pool, and you can really like tune in on that one specific set with 200 or something cards.
Yeah, drafting's honestly so fun. Like I used to even own for Yu-Gi-Oh like a cube where you basically construct your own set, right? And you make your own packs and then you draft with Yu-Gi-Oh cards. So I wish it was more of a thing here. That actually interests me. That's probably, if I did get into Flesh and Blood, I'm sure that's how I would start, would be drafting.
Yeah. I also feel like even if players like yourself don't want to lean heavily into Flesh and Blood, it's interesting to just try out a draft format if you're missing that on the One Piece or Yu-Gi-Oh side, and just play draft if you want to enjoy that and you don't want to spend the big money for the competitive decks. And there are even like these tournaments that you are talking about that we had in Yu-Gi-Oh as well. Shout out to Thomas Rose as well, who experienced that back then. But we have really these YCS level events called callings that are only for draft.
Really?
Or sealed, let's say it like that.
Okay.
It's crazy because on that regards you can go to a big tournament and try to win that way. You don't even need to be a big constructed guy to try that out. Mm-hmm. And you don't have those tournaments like every 2 weeks. But if you're playing Flesh and Blood from that regards, you could go to one big tournament in a year and play Flesh and Blood on that regards, and maybe have One Piece as your constructed game.
Sure. Yeah, no, definitely. That interests me so much more now that I know you guys have like draft, but not only do you have it, you have constructed where you just get the packs, and it's like a pseudo draft kind of, right? And you have to build a deck based on packs that you get. That interests me a lot. So that would be, I'm sure if I got into the game, that would be my first foot in the door.
It's also a little bit more easy, like you said, when you get 6 or 8 packs and you just jam the cards together, that it's so easy to just start and then learn from that, compared to drafting as your first experience in the game, because drafting, you need to know some things about the game at least, But I want to know a little bit more from your side on the old school Yu-Gi-Oh, because you were talking about those tournaments and also about you covering it a lot on your channel. And I know that the pricing you talked about as a thing as well in the Time Wizard format. So how is it really going? Like, how big are these tournaments and what like is the payout for the players there compared to YCS?
Retro Yu-Gi-Oh is pretty dominated by a format called Edison format currently, which was a format in April of 2010. So that is like the primary way that people play Retro Yu-Gi-Oh at the moment, I would say, at least if you're playing it at a competitive level. And their tournament sizes for RBETs, which is a tournament series held by E3 Yu-Gi-Oh! And then by Konami, the Ultimate Time Wizards, range anywhere from, like I said, 200 to 500, just depending on the event, where it's at. But I'd say on average, we can say 300 is the average. It's always a cut to top 8. So you'll do your Swiss rounds. So basically, if you lose twice, you're probably not making it into the cut. You can only lose once. And then from there, the top 3 players get, after the top 8's played out, first place will get a giant card, second and third will get oversized cards. In terms of the value of those, it is much higher than the top end of YCS's, because I've won a YCS. I've sold all my stuff from it, and it was like maybe $2,000-ish that you make. And I think I kept the game station. So maybe 2,500, right? Whereas with Ultimate Time Wizard, the first place giant cards, the cheapest one that has sold has been like $5,000, I think. But it's a 5 to 8K range. And for example, I got third place at the last Ultimate Time Wizard, not the 3v3 event, but the last solo event, which was YCS Orlando. I got third place, so I got one of those oversized cards. And I sold that. So basically, I worked out a deal with Team APS. He gave me 800 cash, and I got a bunch of equipment for my YouTube stuff, like a key light, new mic. I have a new face cam. So yeah, I mean, but those typically sell anywhere from $800 to $1,500, those oversized cards. Versus second place at a YCS, you might get like your super prize cards a couple $100, and then everything together might be $1,000, right? So I'm playing an event that's maybe 15% of the size of the main event, but the top three in terms of prizing is worth a lot more than the top three of actually winning the YCS. So I think for the Ultimate Time Wizards, it's much more worth it. And then at the RBETs, they just do really high-end cards normally. Like first place will get like a mat that's worth a couple hundred. They'll get like $3,000 worth of high-end cards, like Ultimate Rare Caiuses and whatever else. But I think my big gripe with Ultimate Time Wizards currently is that they are only that one format. It's not really retro Yu-Gi-Oh! Or Ultimate Time Wizard. It's just Edison format. Recently, I've been promoting a format called REDU format, or some might better know it as September 2012 or Wind Up format. I don't like the name Wind Up format because, in my opinion, it's not even the best deck, and there wasn't any single events where Wind Up won one event during this format, and there's 4 major YCSs at this time, and at 0 events did it take more than 25% of a top cut. So it's not really fair to call it that, in my opinion, but basically this is a format in September of 2012 where, like I had previously mentioned, a lot of decks had got hit from what was a triangle or square format previously, where there's only really 3 or 4 decks. And now in this format, basically there's 10 plus different decks in every single top cut at every YCS. There's YuGiOh that just came out of REDU, or out of Return of the Duelist, which is why it's called REDU format. There's Wind Up, there's Inzectors, there's Fairies, there's Chaos Dragons, there's Heretics. Like, I can go on and on. There's probably like 20 different actual competitive decks. And I personally just love that format. I played that locally with friends during COVID. Like, that's how I like stayed in Yu-Gi-Oh! And then one day one of my buddies, I made a retro format tier list, and I had it as an S tier format, but most people didn't know what it was. One of my buddies like, you should make a video since you rated it S tier alongside formats people already know about, which was like Edison and Hat. I think I put it in the S tier formats. And then I was like, oh, okay, I'll make a video just because I love the format. And so I make that video, and then all of a sudden it blew up, at least relatively for my channel. And then everyone's telling me they want to play. Everyone's telling me they used to play this format. They have such good memories of this format. So we make a Discord server, and that's been exploding. We're going to have a big event on April 13th online, so anyone anywhere can play it. It's called REDU Rivals, completely free to enter. First place will get a Ghost Rare Stardust. There's a lot of cash prizing as well. But yeah, I've been promoting that because, I mean, I made that video, it blew up. I didn't think everyone would want more content on it, but they do. And since I love it, hopefully at some point we get an Ultimate Time Wizard for it or something. But I know I kind of just rambled for a few minutes there, but...
That's perfect. No, I love it because I think that's basically what I thought Time Wizard was. And I was a little bit like not shocked, but disappointed, I would say, that it's only Edison format, because I like Edison format, but my old school format is, when I think about it, of course, GOAT and maybe the period afterwards. And I would love if there are like multiple tournaments, as you are, I think, describing it as well. If you could play REDU, GOAT, or Edison, for example, or even coming back to the 2016 or 17 era at some point. And I think that would also bring players like us back into Yu-Gi-Oh! From time to time, even though we don't really want to play it on a regular basis anymore.
Yeah, the I Am Nerd channel with Fraser Smith, I don't know if you follow him at all, but he came up with the idea that like they should do like seasons, right? Like maybe half a year where it's like, all right, this 6 months is REDU format season. This 6 months is Edison. This 6 months GOAT format. This 6 month is new challengers, whatever it might be. And I think that would, and then they could rotate, right? If you had 6 or 7 of everyone's favorite retro formats, and even if it was 3 months, not 6 months, right? Then it would keep it all super fresh while also kind of giving everyone the spotlight. Because I'm not sure if Edison's so big because it's the best format, or if it's only because it's the only format being presented to us that has major tournaments. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Which I'm sure it's a combination of the two, right? But yeah, no, I agree. I would love if they just did all the different formats though, rather than just the one, because it's not really Ultimate Time Wizard. Then just call a spade and say Edison Championship. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah, exactly. The Ultimate Edison Championship, is it? But also when we talk about pricing again, I feel it's funny that you said that the tournament that is like 15% of the size of the modern Yu-Gi-Oh events is like having much bigger pricing than the main event. And also I think that opens up the possibilities to, like, if we go down that road that you just described, maybe with 3 months a period, that we have these prize cards or these like giant cards that are given out at these Time Wizard events that then are really sought after by all of these old school collectors in Yu-Gi-Oh! And that are only available for a short period of time. Maybe 2025 has a period of REDU where there is like a wind-up prize card that can only be obtained in 3 months. And then afterwards comes Gold, and there is like a Dark Magician of Chaos that can only be obtained in those 3 months and going forward. I think that would also be like a very pleasing way of introducing like the collectability again, because that's something that I like always thought was crazy when looking at the modern pricing, is that it's so repetitive, right? Even though we get like a new vanilla monster, for me, it doesn't really feel like we are getting a new prize card. We are just getting a ramped up version of the last one, and it's maybe even worse. I don't know. Yeah, no, I agree completely. And I feel the same way. And the other weird thing is, right, like getting a prize card you can't play, right? Like these vanillas, like you can theoretically play them, I guess. But I actually, they might even say on them that you can't play them. I'm not sure. But regardless, like even if you had the opportunity to play them, you would never play them, right? So you're getting like a tiny card that you can never play versus like a spectacle. Like when someone walks into your house, if you have a prize card on your wall, you know what I mean? It's, oh, wow, you won something big. Whereas if someone walked into your house and sees a little vanilla monster on your shelf, they're just going to think you collected it. You know, like they're not going to think, you know, I don't know. I just think that it's crazy. I'm surprised they don't give out like the giant cards for YCS winners even, but who knows? I also feel like when we are coming back to Flesh and Blood, for example, and the newer TCGs like One Piece, Star Wars Unlimited, and Disney Lorcana, they are also upping the collectability game much more than Yu-Gi-Oh! In my opinion, right? Yep. I'm not sure in your opinion here, but I'm not really enjoying like Starlights and Quarter Century Secret Rares and stuff like that. I was really digging like the old school stuff, like the old Ghost Rares or the Ultimate Rare styles that we had in the GX era. Even some of the later or Ultimate Rares. And I feel like they could just do some easy tweaks to the pricing as well and give out like exclusive Ultimate Rare prize cards, for example, of cards that are already out there. Even if it's just a reprint, they have a special rarity that is only given out for the prize card. Or they do something like Flesh and Blood and they just pick it up. Because to me, that's crazy. When I was introduced to that in Flesh and Blood, it got me hooked as a collector in Flesh and Blood. Oh, wow. And they have these full art cards that are even sick. Like they're shining like Ultimate Rares. I'm not really sure if you can see that. No, I can kind of see the texture. Yeah. And they are double-sided as well, right? So you have the regular version on the one side and then a full art side on this. And I feel like just imagine a Blue Eyes White Dragon on this in this style. Yeah, like, that'd be sick. We would go crazy. Yeah, and that's what like they're really missing out on is like the prize card that you're getting either has to be like, so regardless, it has to be unique, right? So I think it needs to be like an ultimate rare or some random rarity that doesn't exist currently, right? But it has to be something that's either really good or really sought after. And the issue is they're doing cards no one cares about and aren't good whatsoever. So that's what really kills the value too. Like you said, if it was a Blue Eyes White Dragon alt art ultimate rare that was stamped, imagine how much that would go for, you know? But I don't think Konami really cares for the secondary market. I don't know. I do think pricing is the biggest gripe with Yu-Gi-Oh! And then the second biggest is power creep, in my opinion. Yeah. And I also feel when you are wanting to join a new TCG, that's like the low-hanging fruits that these companies can just pick up and get the players to play their game. And One Piece also does an amazing job on it. I was buying my first One Piece box a few weeks ago and just opening it to see like how I enjoy the cards. And I was pulling like a secret rare alt art, and I was amazed. It was beautiful. And even though I don't know anything about the anime, I was like, you know what? It's crazy. I love it. And I put it in my collection. And I can also see like how easy it is for Bandai to do that. Also with the prize cards to give out like then these sought after playables or really loved characters just in a new treatment with the artwork. And they even give it out to like top 64, top 32, like with that stacked environment. So everyone that perform well can have something. And it also results in what you described, players coming over and making a fortune on the side, which is nice, right? Why wouldn't you do that? I always remember when I was younger, friends of mine who are getting into soccer, for example, in Germany is a big thing that you can earn money on the side with, even though you're having a main job. And you couldn't really do that with Yu-Gi-Oh! Nowadays, but you could do it easily with One Piece as well.
Yeah, no, for sure. And it's like you said, it's low-hanging fruit. It's something that like they could easily do. And it looks like maybe they're starting to with that whole effect veiler thing. I know that's just like the first step, but we'll have to see. We'll have to see.
Yeah. At least I have to really shout out Konami here for connecting us through the game, because if I wouldn't have the love for Yu-Gi-Oh, we wouldn't talk now. And I think we can cherish all the good parts about Yu-Gi-Oh, even though we think they could improve. I think it's good to cherish like the beautiful moments and also the good things that still are around today. But I feel like just from the outside, not being that active in the Yu-Gi-Oh community anymore, Konami just needs to step up and also provide a lot more healthier environment for the players that way. Because how must it feel when you're like crying for like years and years and the company just shits on you over and over again? And I feel like that's what also like companies like Legend Story Studios with Flesh and Blood, or even Bandai with One Piece is doing better these days.
Right. Yeah, I think the biggest positive is I think the product Konami has, like the how the game is played for Yu-Gi-Oh is as well as just the design of the game in general is like their biggest ace in the hole, because I think it's one of the most well-designed games. But like they don't foster it. They don't foster the community. They don't like try to prevent power creep. They don't, I don't know. I feel like rather it's just, it feels like they're just maximizing what can go in their pocket sometimes, which I know that sounds like, I don't want to say that because I love this game and I'm indebted to them for so many things, to be honest with you. But yeah, it's definitely a big gripe.
Yeah. But I also feel like that opened up the opportunity for personalities like yourself to go out and foster a community themselves, right? What you are basically doing with the REDU format and giving a haven for people that want to have that kind of community in Yu-Gi-Oh! And don't want to play a new TCG. Because honestly, like if I wouldn't have discovered Flesh and Blood, maybe that was the point in 2021 where I just vanished from TCGs and then could come back to Yu-Gi-Oh! In the retro aspect and join a community like yourself. I'm not saying that I won't at some point. Maybe I'm playing in a tournament as well at some point if it's online. But I can't really see myself investing in Yu-Gi-Oh! Time-wise and money-wise anymore that big as I was back then, because there are also these other options. And I'm not really seeing the point why I would go to a YCS and pick up a modern deck when I can just go to a limited Flesh and Blood event, honestly.
That's fair. That's fair.
I know you have plans for this weekend and the next as well. So maybe you want to touch on that and we don't close down the podcast.
Sure. Yeah. Sounds good. This weekend, I'm going to South Florida to play at Southside Gaming's Edison tournament. They have massive prizing. Like first place is 3 Ultimate Kaias, as well as the UDS Black Rose mat, which I think is like a $4,000 or $5,000 mat. So yeah, that's just first place. Their prizing all the way through top 4 is like absurd. I wasn't originally going to go out to that, but shout outs to them. They're flying me out there to play in their event, so I'm really excited for that. Wow. And then the following weekend, I'll be going to Houston, Texas to play at YCS Houston in the Ultimate Time Wizard event. And then we'll see from there. Super excited, though. Honestly, retro Yu-Gi-Oh! Has definitely reinvigorated my love for Yu-Gi-Oh! That's why I said I don't see anytime soon me switching card games, but we'll see. We'll see. What about you? Do you got any of the upcoming events coming up for yourself with the Flesh and Blood or anything else?
I'm not really sure which event I will go to next, but I'm sure now that the next Flesh and Blood set is coming out soon, and that's like what I'm looking at to pick up on the tournament side here locally. But I don't have any bigger tournaments sadly planned because I already made up my travel plans on with my girlfriend and my family.
Oh, there you go.
But I had a big tournament in the beginning of the year for Flesh and Blood where the new set was announced, because they basically have these world premieres, as they are call it, when the new set is announced, that they are doing like a big tournament only for that specific set. Okay. And so if you go to that, you can play the set early and play it sealed and draft. And then afterwards, it is released on the local tournament site.
Gotcha. All right. Well.
And I hope, like, really, you need to send me the links to your Discord and also the tournament that you are talking about, so I can link it down and take a look at it myself as well.
Heck yeah, will do. Thank you so much for having me on, man. I really appreciate it. Like I said, I love your content. I think you have some of the best podcasting style content out there, especially for card game communities. And I like that you like kind of get an eye into all the different card games and get different opinions and different voices from prominent people involved in those card games. I don't know, it's unique. It's definitely a good listen. Anyone who's still listening at this point, if you're not subscribed, subscribe to my boy Alex with the Fabled Academy podcast series here. And thank you so much again for having me, man.
Thanks so much, Marcus. I really appreciate it, and I love the time with you. And I also have an Easter egg for you, because I knew we were talking about Yu-Gi-Oh players coming to One Piece. And I have an interview coming up with Joshua Osters, a European Yu-Gi-Oh player who just got 3rd place at One Piece Worlds.
Yep, I've seen. He's been killing it. He's a really good player too.
All right, Marcus, I wish you all the best and have fun at the weekend.
Likewise. Thank you so much, man.
That's a wrap for today, Academy. You can listen to the last episode to hear more from Marcus and myself. Or tune in the next episode, where I talk to Lucas Oswald, who once was the North American Dragon Duel champion in Yu-Gi-Oh for 2019. But despite his skill in Yu-Gi-Oh, he started a career in the new TCG, Flesh and Blood. He had major success in the last years, like winning a Battle Harden and a Calling. The episode comes out a week after this one, so either subscribe to get notified or click here to watch it.